Welcome. For those of you I don't know, and that is many of you, my name is Stephanie Steinberg. I am the founder and CEO of the New York Writing Room and the Detroit Writing Room in downtown Detroit. I am so excited for tonight's book talk. I have to say, you all broke our book talk record for the number of attendees for a virtual event. So congratulations. I'm very excited to host Liz this evening and to celebrate her new memoir. Feel free to join in if you have a drink. I don't know if you can see with my virtual background. Grab a glass of wine or champagne or some snacks. This is meant to be a good time. Yes, I see we got some drinks going. And I just want to, before we get started, really say thank you to Liz. Liz is one of our New York Writing Room coaches, and I just met her over last summer when I decided to open the New York Writing Room and was looking for some coaches talented in various genres, including memoir, fiction, poetry, journalism. Liz knows it all. So she was really quite a wonderful fit for us, and I'm just so honored to have her on the team and very excited to hear all about her book tonight. I know many of you probably know each other, but I'd love to take a moment, and if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat box, feel free to use that and share who you are, where you're from, how you know Liz. If there's something you want to learn tonight, you can add that too, or add your social media handles if you want to connect with each other. So feel free to pop in your information in the chat box. But I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lizz Schumer, our honored author of the evening, and let her take away the Zoom.
Oh, before I get started, Stephanie, did you want to do a Zoom picture?
Oh, my goodness, I completely forgot. Yeah.
I got you.
Thank you for reminding me. So if you've got your drink or something you want to hold up to celebrate, we're going to do a Zoom photo. Jacqueline, our wonderful, amazing intern, is going to take it. So she's saying hi. Jacqueline, if you want to count us down, you are welcome to do that.
Okay, perfect. 3, 2, 1. Okay. It should be good.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqueline.
All Thanks, right. Jacqueline.
And now, without further ado, Liz, this is all yours.
All right. So first of all, before we get started, so many thanks to Stephanie and the New York and Detroit Writing Room for hosting me and all of us for this event tonight. It would be impossible to get this sort of thing together without your support. So I will echo that thanks right back to you. I think the community and support and conviviality that the Writing Room has created has really been a really lovely bright spot for me and for so many people during a really challenging time, I think, to make the understatement of the year. So I just want to circle around the gratitude before we get going. To set a little game plan for this evening, I'm going to read to you a little bit from this wonderful book. I think it's wonderful. I'm very biased. And then we're going to I'm going to give you a little bit of background on why I wrote it, some of the themes that emerge, why I think they're important, and why I think right now in particular is an especially good time for a book like this one. I did not write it with the current cultural zeitgeist in mind, but it worked out anyway. So, and then at the end, after about, 30-ish minutes of that, where I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So I know some of you have promised / threatened to ask me questions tonight. So I do hope that you do that. Please be kind. And that's the plan. So, also, I discovered earlier today that today is actually National Read Aloud Day. So this works out really great. Again, I didn't plan that either, but here we are. So you don't have to have read the book for tonight's discussion. I know that not everyone reads like 6 books a week like I do. So I'm going to give you a little background by starting out. I'm going to read to you chapter 4. Now, this book, as we'll talk about, is not necessarily linear, so you're not missing anything in the first 3 chapters, nor does it necessarily need to follow into the chapters subsequently, but it's a little slice and leads pretty naturally into what we'll be talking about. So without further ado, Marilyn Monroe was either a size 12, 16, 8, or 6, depending on the source. Women from Roseanne Barr to Elizabeth Hurley have been quoted as commenting on her body size, the body of one of the sexiest women of our time, with an air of celebration, condescension, and most of all, comparison. As women, as people, we are taught to scrutinize ourselves and one another, to measure carefully the bodies plastered on billboards above Times Square, bursting out of buildings like paradigms of perfection. And Marilyn, one of the most enduring icons of sex and carnal pleasure, both lauded and maligned for her sumptuous, scrumptious flesh. And women have debated her sizes, even trying on her dresses for years after her demise. They speculate, refute, reimagine, because we need to know how she measured up so that we can know where we stand. Because if Marilyn was a size 12, then that makes it okay. If she has tits and ass and handles to grab, then it's acceptable for women to have those too. Because we need that validation from a world that tells us, from the magazine stands to inside our own heads, in an instinct so early it must be inborn or socialized from the womb. Because we need to know her measurements, to know how we measure up. Height. 5 feet, 5.5 inches. Average height, the doctor tells us, checking it off on a chart like an accomplishment. Like an elementary school report card, Elizabeth's attention span is average, her writing is above average, her math is below average, does not play well with others. Or normalized. Weight, 118 pounds. Weighing ourselves feels like going to the butcher. How many pounds of flesh for tonight's sacrifice? How much do you need? How much are you worth? Bust, 35 to 37 inches. Breasts are contradictions, sources of nourishment and sexual pleasure. I try not to think about the correlation between suckling and sex, about a baby sucking nourishment from a distended tit, white and veined, swallowing milk and keening. I think of men twisting nipples between their teeth, and are they recalling that first intimacy that fed them too? I try not to make this correlation. I do anyway and kick my partner out of bed. Waist, 22 to 23 inches. I think of Scarlett O'Hara and how I once tried on a corset at an audition, an impromptu fit model. The director told me to grab onto a pipe in the wall. He braced one foot against it to get leverage. I almost passed out and had to sit in a chair for what felt like hours while he gazed at me, how apologetic. I didn't get the part. Hips, 35 to 36 inches. Hips don't lie, except they do. Bodies do, in ways that are forgiven less often than they're detected. Bodies tell us all sorts of things, least of which the ones we understand. My body and I have spent decades at war, against ourselves, others' perceptions, society's expectations, and I wonder if that war drove Marilyn to her end too, because it's hard to be a woman who's looked at, whose body is thrown up as an example of beauty, then of excess, then beauty again. Riding a seesaw all day will make us sick, but we all do it anyway. When I was in elementary school, a kid in my class was fat. They taunted him mercilessly. He had food on his shirt nearly every day and once rolled down the new handicapped accessible ramp just to show he could. I can still see him taking a running start in his scuffed burgundy loafers, his ass jiggling inside faded blue chino pants. He yelled a war whoop as he crossed his arms around himself and barrel rolled all the way down, laughing all the way. All of us laughing for our own reasons, and the same. His girth protected him from the hard linoleum floor, but he cried when they teased him sometimes. They called him fatty, cow, pig, animal names, because what's different can't be human, because humans have feelings and that's too difficult to take. He drank chocolate milk, I remember that, and sometimes spat it out through the straw in an attempt to turn humor back on his side. Some days it worked. But no one can stay class clown and target, not in the elementary jungle. It was always bound to come back to him, and I can still see the wetness in his eyes when he realized he was not controlling the laughter anymore. Even the teachers were cruel, dumping his disordered desk onto his lap when he couldn't find his homework. He cried then too, big rolling tears, and they yelled at him anyway, because those were the days when teachers and parents could do what they wanted with us, and did. These were the days before childhood obesity, before body positivity, when you were fat and fat was other. Fat was to be scorned and hated, and I secretly feared him for it. I sat behind him in 3rd grade. That same year, I broke my glasses and hid them in my closet for a month, failing every spelling test because I couldn't see the blackboard to copy down the words to study. I read a book in my desk during math and science, tried to listen through history, and mostly daydreamed. I spent many of those lessons encircling my own wrists with my finger in my lap, squeezing until every single one overlapped. I'd stare at his wrists and wonder how far around my fingers would go. If our measurements were the same, I thought, that meant I was just like him, that I was other, was worthy of the taunting I always felt was 1 minute away from turning on me too. I never trusted what was in the mirror because, I thought, if he saw himself in the mirror the way we all saw him, he'd do something to change it. It was unfathomable to me that he'd choose to stay the way he was, or that he wouldn't care. I assigned my own insecurity to his body, as we all do to those bodies we don't know. If I saw him again, I'd apologize for all they did and everything I didn't do. I'd tell them they didn't mean it, and I'd be lying because children are unfailingly, intentionally cruel. I'd tell him it was just kids being kids, even though that doesn't help. But most of all, I'd apologize for my own agonized comparisons, for looking at his sizes and my own and measuring myself against his as a means of deciding whether I was enough or too much based on the excess his body presented to mine. I tell him it didn't matter then, and it doesn't matter now, whether my fingers would wrap around his wrist and overlap at the edges, if those wrists are creased like infant knees or knobbed and bony like my own. It doesn't matter, I'd tell him, and we'd both know I was lying, but that wouldn't matter either. Because if enough of us say it often enough, maybe that will make it true. We create our own religion of sizeism, our own ethics of looking at each person as an individual entity, and wrap our fingers around each other's wrists in solidarity as human creatures, and not worry whether they'll fit. Oh, thank you. I gotta say, it's very bizarre to see people's hands going like this and not actually be able to hear anything, but the spirit of the thing is there, and that's the important part. So thank you. So as you've noticed, this book deals with some very personal topics, and that's one of the things that, that I want to talk about today. And there's a reason why this book is intensely personal, and in many ways, I think also speaks to a universality of experience that makes that important. So first of all, some of the topics that we're covering are what we generally think of as taboo, the things that we don't talk about, the things that are inappropriate to bring up in polite society or at the dinner table or among what we used to call mixed company. I say we, I mean we as a society. I'm too young for that, hopefully. We'll say that I am. But see, the interesting thing about taboo topics is taboo is a social construction, right? We have collectively, as an American society and as a Western society in many ways, have decided what it is and is not appropriate to talk about. And that is a harmful construct to a lot of people, namely the people who deal with these taboos that we've decided you have to keep under wraps. And And I think one of the reasons why I write about these things is because I want to open that up a little bit, right? I want to expose these topics to even a very small conversation, a conversation between me and whoever's reading this book, because in conversation comes clarity, and in clarity comes understanding, and in understanding comes acceptance. So some of the topics that we cover in this book, and you'll know this if you've read it already, no pressure if you haven't gotten to it yet, or if it hasn't gotten to you. I didn't get my copy until Saturday, so if you're still waiting, you're not too far behind. We talk about body image, obviously, you just heard about that. We talk about religion. We talk about relationships that take a hard left into uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous territory. We talk about disability and chronic illness and these complicated feelings that women have in particular. Now, obviously, I'm a woman in a woman assigned body, and I can only speak from that experience. So that is the experience that I am speaking from in the book, and that I will be speaking from in this conversation as well. So let's talk about how we're going to dismantle some of those taboos. I think we already mentioned, but one of the most important ways, I think, is getting those out into the open, is starting these conversations. Because one of the things that I was thinking about as I was writing the book, as I was ruminating over what was going to be included, was the idea of visibility, and of visibility as a means of solidarity. And a lot of this book I was writing and editing and putting together when the Me Too movement was really gaining steam. Can we remember back that far? It's been a while. A lot has happened since then. And I was really struck by, I don't know if those of you who are on social media, if you remember the tide of women's stories, mostly women, some men too, some non-binary people in addition, that sort of overtook social media for a couple of days. And it was just such an emotional experience to see this visibility, and to see the bravery and the vulnerability and the people stepping out of these shadows that society has constructed for us. Was a really, really powerful thing. And I thought to myself, it's scary to tell these stories. It's scary to tell any stories. Those of you who are on this call who are also writers or creatives already know this. To share anything that's come out of your own brain. And I guess this applies to people who aren't creatives as well, although I don't know what that's like. But to share anything that you've come up with is a vulnerable act, and is a brave act, and is something that takes a certain amount of self-awareness and vulnerability in and of itself. But to share a story that's personal and that's raw and that reveals something human and animal in yourself takes just that much more. And I have to say, when I was first writing down a lot of these stories and a lot of these things, I had a lot of feelings about what that was like, right? A lot of feelings about why share these personal stories? Why share these, in some ways, in a lot of ways, painful and very individual stories? What good does that do me? What good does that do the people who have to read them, or my loved ones, or my community, all of these things? And what I really landed on was that there is a high degree of empowerment in stepping out and saying, look, this happened. This is what I did or I went through, and this is something that has been formative, or that has had an impact on my life. And hey, maybe it's had an impact on your life too. Maybe you've had a similar experience that you are not in a place to share from, or are not in a place where you're even safe sharing. And that was something else that I was really struck by as I began to gather these stories and these pieces for this book in particular, was that I am in a very privileged, very comfortable position. I mean, looking around this virtual room proves that I'm surrounded by having feelings now, by a loving cadre of family and friends who support me in telling the stories that I have to share. Most people, don't, right? Most people have to hold their secrets and have to hold their vulnerabilities in that warm, soft, dark place where they come from. But because of this position that I'm in, I can throw them all out there and say, look, maybe you see something here, maybe you don't, but there's power in getting more stories out into the world that are marginalized in some way, or that are emotional, or that are vulnerable, because we don't have enough of that. And in many ways, women in particular are discouraged from telling the kinds of stories that are vulnerable. You know, I was also, as I was preparing this talk in particular, I was watching AOC do her Instagram live about what it felt like to be in the Capitol, and likening that to her sexual assault. And I'm thinking, my God, this woman has gone through so much, and there are people who are going on the internet and criticizing her for turning that into a political statement. Now look, being a woman in 2021 is a political statement. I didn't pick that particular statement, but here I am, and here are a lot of you. So I think using whatever platform you've got to tell whatever story you've got, if it's inherently political right now, well, okay, it is. And I think if you have the ability to speak truth to power in your own little corner of the world, well, I'm embracing that, and I think that's important. Now, a little bit about the form that this book takes. Those of you who have read it or have started it, or I see some members of my writing group here who know this about me and my writing already. Hi, friends. It's a blend of essay and verse with a little bit of, that's mostly it. I pretty much chose all of the forms of writing that I do, stuck them in a blender, put the lid on halfway, and saw what would happen. And there's a reason for that. I think I like to say that when I start to write a story or to tell a story, I let the story tell me what shape it needs to take. Sometimes that's a poem, sometimes it's an essay, sometimes it's a researched article that needs other voices besides my own to prop it up and give it more weight, to form a bit of a bedrock for it. And I thought that was a really interesting way to approach my personal story, because I don't know what your experiences are like, but throughout my life, I've experienced different things in different ways. You know, not every time we have a conversation or go through something challenging, or, I don't know, eat a candy bar, it shapes us in some way. And those moldings and shapings can lead to different expressions of how our souls and our spirits are feeling at the time. And for me, speaking those moments in both poetry and prose felt very natural. And I also see some of my Goddard College classmates and cohort mates here. And I have to give credit where credit is due to my MFA at Goddard College for showing me that that was even possible. When I first started my MFA back in, I don't even remember the year, it doesn't matter, many moons ago, I was actually a poetry major, because at the time I thought, well, okay, I do journalism during the day and I write poetry at night, and these are the two options. These are option A and option B. But when I started reading more widely and learning about the canon of really mostly women authors who were writing hybrid prose or hybrid poetry, or just hybrid text, depending on how you want to refer to it, that's a different class coming up at the New York Writing Room in a couple of months. We'll talk about that later. I realized that I don't have to segment these two pieces of my writerly identity. I can put them together. And writers like Lydia Yuknovich and Anne Carson and Claudia Rankine all broadened the breadth and the depth of what was possible in writing, and really led me to a new and richer and more expressive place. But I also included a lot of what those of you who've studied writing with me or elsewhere will know as confessional memoir. I address that very directly in this book because confessional memoir gets a very bad rap. And there's a reason for that, right? They're seen as navel gazing. They're seen as too personal. They're seen as, I don't know, too individual to resonate widely. Well, I got to thinking about that as I was writing through this story and thinking, boy, do I have to include other perspectives, or do I have to go into the context of where this is coming from? Well, someone had to tell us that the wider readership wouldn't be interested in these stories. That's the canon. Well, who's the canon? White, middle-aged, elderly men. So if the stories are not interesting to the people who have decided what stories are worth telling, well, that doesn't really concern me, now does it? I'm not particularly interested in what the Academy thinks is worth telling, or thinks is worth publishing, or worth reading, or whatever. And I think we're at this beautiful moment in literature and in art and in media where there's a great democratization of what is available, right? I mean, turn on your TV and look at the amazing array of streaming options that we have. I have a queue, like, I don't know, I need another lifetime to get through all of the options that there are for art that I can consume just through one medium alone. So I think I'm trying to challenge the idea that these individual stories are not worth our time, because I'm frankly sick of someone else telling me what is worthwhile and what else should be told and what people should be reading and synthesizing and propagating in our culture. And I think that's the challenge that I want to issue with this book, is to read more widely and to experience the types of narratives and the forms and the ways of presenting ideas that you might not be familiar with. When I was pitching the book to some of my media colleagues, I called it like an intro to poetry, right? Because there is some poetry in here, not a ton, but there is. It kind of sneaks you into it. Well, I guess you do start off with poetry right at the beginning, don't you? Okay, you start off with a few lines, but then you get right into prose where you're comfortable, maybe. And I think that's a great way to get people into the idea of, okay, maybe I can read this stuff. Maybe poetry isn't just for the hippies in Vermont. Guilty. Maybe you can just take all the kinds of writing that you enjoy and put them together. I think this book is a lot about experimentation and a lot about connection and a lot about finding ways to reach out, especially right now when we're like this, to reach out to somebody who wants to experience something new, who wants to experience something that is maybe outside of themselves, but also of themselves. And I'm hoping that that is something that you find in this book and that you can share with someone else. And I do encourage you to share it. I know there's a lot of discussion about, should everybody buy a book? Should you rent it from the library? Is book pirating a problem? Well, yeah, okay, but come on, no one's getting rich here. So if you enjoy the book and you think somebody else might get something out of it, I would love if you would share it with a friend or a family member, or heck, I have a friend who leaves books, not right now, please don't do this right now, but they leave books in the back seats of airplanes, you know, where the vomit bag goes, for people to discover. He buys a whole bunch of them and carries them with him whenever he travels. So when we travel again, maybe leave this somewhere. Leave it in your little free library, because I think there's messages that may be small. I'm just one little person in Buffalo, New York, with like 1,000 Twitter followers, but I think these stories are important. And I want to also challenge everybody who's here, who's listening, and hopefully sharing these messages with your friends and family, that your stories are important too. Whatever those stories happen to be, however you choose to tell them or not tell them, or don't feel ready or safe or prepared to tell them. I think the importance of story is something that we can all take away from this. And I really thank everybody for taking even just this time with me tonight to validate that these stories matter. So with